I want to say that Tears of the Kingdom was one of the strangest games I've ever experienced. It wasn't my favorite Zelda game. In fact, I wouldn't even say that it was in my top 10. But I do feel that, much like other sequels in the series, it carried an incredible depth of philosophical, psychological, and spiritual symbolism. A lot about this game is almost unpleasantly weird. Not only did it subvert the timeline and many other, albeit unspoken, series-long conventions, it kind of messed with my overall sense of reality. Actually, I would say that my journey with the game was sort of similar to my first viewing of the Twin Peaks reboot. Both, like their predecessors, had their exceptional and immediately awe-inspiring moments. But overall, for me, they initially felt jarring and tonally dissonant. That was until I dared to look below their respective surfaces. Then I started to see and understand things that I hadn't quite realized were present. Things which required time to digest. In both instances, I have no way of knowing whether the seeds of meaning and symbolism I gleaned were in any way intended by their respective creators, but ultimately, I decided that it didn't matter. Throughout history, the best fantasy stories were those which encouraged multiple interpretations, stimulating analysis, curiosity, and imagination in perpetuity. In the end, that's what Tears of the Kingdom is to me. It was a worthy experience, and I found that the longer I reflected upon it, the more significant it became. Tears of the Kingdom, perhaps in a similar capacity to Link's Awakening, Majora's Mask, and other sequels, expresses something of a regressive fantasy, wherein Link revisits familiar characters, situations, and concepts, causing us to look back on previous titles and examine their unique significance within our own lives and Link's memories alike. The themes of memories and time have been integral throughout the series' history. However, in Tears of the Kingdom, we're also regressing in a fairly novel and increasingly metatextual way. Where Majora's Mask and Link's Awakening, for instance, focused more on questions pertaining to personal identity, nostalgia, and the role and impact of dreams, this game also includes more contemporary existential questions, delving into concepts like augmented reality, bodies infusing with technology, and radically altered timelines. In addition to the usual themes of transcendence, courage, and identity, I feel that this game might intentionally be regressing into the bowels of the modern psyche. More than this, whether it was planned or not, I believe that it examines the symbiotic relationship between the franchise and its fans. Right out of the gate, Tears of the Kingdom showcases the wonders of science, celebrating futurism and more modern interpretations of magic, with further emphasis on artificial intelligence, holographic devices, and reality-bending quantum technology. Of course, other Zelda games, especially Breath of the Wild, brushed against many of these subjects heartily, but Tears of the Kingdom takes it a ways further. Aesthetically and conceptually delving ever deeper into the uncanny valley between real and imagined, past and present, physical and metaphysical, and perhaps also physical and digital, drawing parallels and very intentionally blurring the lines between dreams, memories, simulations, altered states of consciousness, and transcendent mystical experience. Tears of the Kingdom also feels like the most meta Zelda game thus far, not only presenting what appear to be layered and nested modes of reality, but also spanning and compromising the entire series in a self-referential manner, and even bringing the timeline to full circle. More on that later. It also feels somewhat meta in that there is further inclusion of the fans, fourth-wall-breaking items, and the very abrupt presence of the Zonai culture, which seems almost as if influenced by the fans themselves. First, however, please understand that what I'm about to say is meant to be taken in a less literal context. This video's interest lies primarily in symbolism, intentional or otherwise, both objective and subjective in nature. Bearing that in mind, the strange, enlightened, technologically advanced Zonai, who dwell within a realm that is married to Hyrule in many senses of the word, kind of gives off a vibe similar to something like Minecraft or Second Life, or other MMOs with a diverse fanbase, and a highly eclectic, interactive, and customizable interface. To me, both Tears of the Kingdom itself and the Zonai seem somewhat intrusive within the franchise, their very presence obfuscating many of the series' established norms, and possibly even its timeline. And I sort of feel like this was intentional, at least partially. Compared with the Hylians, these guys appear to be a bunch of reality-altering, interdimensional moderators. The Zonai, in various ways, have watched over Hyrule from afar, lovingly observing and influencing its various conflicts and timelines, wielding the power to shape Hyrule into ostensibly anything they want, remaining unseen all the while. And in this, they're not unlike many gamers today, who not only demonstrate an intense and ironic desire to transform and customize the very material they revere, but also to view such alterations as canon modes of gameplay. Such proclivities are honored within Tears of the Kingdom, pandering to the excitability of power gamers, speedrunners, and mod communities, and to our manic eagerness to control the gameplay, to secure our supply of that good old Zelda magic, and to just accumulate more and more and more stuff until we are drowning in options, drowning in magic, drowning in horizons and gods and upgrades and transcendent moments, and, well, there's a little conundrum there. I don't exactly know if it's a problem with the game itself, the franchise, the industry, the fans, or just more broadly the zeitgeist, but I'm sure many of us have noticed that after a point, the manic and frankly jaded pursuit of quantity of anything, we'll say X noun, really inevitably tends to cheapen and distract from the very same raw open-hearted experience which once endeared us to X noun in the first place. The Zelda series is a perfect example of X noun, as it has a very genuine magic to it. The elusive nature and origin of that magic is primarily what this video is going to be about. Oh look, it's this scene again. Okay, yeah, give me the thing. This is so magical. This game will get even more magical if we add more of it. That's just math, right? More is always better. I don't know though. I still don't feel cute yet. I don't know. I still don't feel carefree. I still don't feel important. Maybe if I add a moat. I still feel lonely. I still feel poor. I still feel vulnerable. I don't get it, you guys. This just isn't working. No matter what we do, we don't feel any different. It's almost like we can escape everything except for ourselves. The Zelda series used to fill us with such joy and wonder and creativity. We keep adding more Zelda, so why isn't it working? Do any of you guys remember how good it once felt just to pick up a rupee in Link's Awakening? No? What about that little fanfare when you unexpectedly received a mask in Majora? How about this? I don't know about you, but I just finished Twilight Princess for the 10th odd time recently, and I sort of already want to play it again. Now, that game was highly restrictive, linear, and formulaic. But there was an indescribable magic in it. But you know, for entirely different reasons, I also want to play Breath of the Wild again. I keep thinking about it. My mind wanders into its beautiful rolling fields. Then I think of the cozy little houses in Oracle of Seasons, another game I occasionally crave. Or I think of the vast, sparse seas of Wind Waker, juxtaposed with its vibrant villages. Or the haunting intimacy of Majora's Mask. In many ways, all 5 of these games are quite different from one another, but strangely, they all have a similar specialness about them. The specialness of Tears of the Kingdom feels harder to get to, harder to find. Even though there's seemingly more of everything, a lot of it feels empty, depleted, almost like the game itself is an imposter of a Zelda game, or just a mutation of Breath of the Wild.
And I'll for sure be delving more into that later.
But for starters, let's just ignore Tears of the Kingdom's development process entirely and focus on Breath of the Wild's unique magic. Mirroring the likes of Elder Scrolls and other sandbox RPGs, dispersing the adventure throughout a vast wilderness and breaking it down into hundreds of bite-sized interactions, some albeit more interesting than others. Many, myself included, felt and still feel that Breath of the Wild was simply the best open-world game out there. I'd be lying, however, if I said that it didn't sacrifice classic Zelda's more memorable zones and NPCs for its magnificent scale and gameplay, or that the gameplay loops themselves didn't get repetitive. But at worst, these things sat more or less on the comfortable edge of monotonous. Most of us never felt like we had to do all the busy work, or go grinding for monster parts, and the game had enough interesting personalities, even if most of its NPCs seemed fairly uninspired when contrasted with the likes of older games. At its best, however, Breath of the Wild was highly medicinal. Everything felt so free and peaceful, so sacred and natural, brimming with delight and wonder. There was a sort of innocence to Breath of the Wild, so much heart, and a nigh unassailable sense of beauty, nobility, and hope, wherever you went, with the notable exceptions being Hyrule Castle and the Divine Beasts, which in turn added a hair-raising current of grief and despair, making the sunny, tranquil world shine all the brighter. The people were scattered, and yet they upheld a common, vital purpose, recovering from the calamity, a devastating event that transformed their world. There was a sense of triumph therein. In spite of everything, Hyrule was not defeated. The hero was resurrected. The goddess was awakened. The people won. Then, Tears of the Kingdom employed a virtually identical approach, indeed employing a virtually identical map. Yet, for me at least, the 2 games felt amazingly dissimilar. It wasn't even just the novelty though. The tone is extremely different. This is just my opinion, but the world feels the same yet somehow almost degraded. That spiritual core of Breath of the Wild is gone. I think this is true on many levels, some of which again seem intentional. Now, as we depart the age of nature, innocence, and mystery, it seems that the ancient, drawn-out battle between good and evil has come to a head. Because, despite all the blood, sweat, and tears of the hero of the wild, despite Princess Zelda's unimaginable dedication and sacrifice, despite so much loss and so much suffering, the embodiment of evil was never truly destroyed. And yeah, everything feels a little darker and a little uglier, There's a new apocalypse and a new, even worse form of black goop. The monsters have encroached further into human spaces and are more aggressive than ever. And Ganon's phantom figuratively and quite literally stalks the landscape, seeping out of shadows and terrorizing Link and the player. Now, Ganon and his ragtag band of Gleeoks have come to subvert the divine, to corrupt human societies, and to sully everything good and beautiful. So, unsurprisingly, Tears of the Kingdom also feels like the game that is the most removed from the sacred realm. By this point, every aspect of Hyrule is very much in a state of decay. There is no king, there's barely even a princess, edifices are in disrepair or even ruin. Remaining structures are fading, important histories are forgotten. Established powers are displaced, and established tools are scarce and failing. Even the fairies have fled from their gardens, demanding further payment, causing our exchanges with the divine to seem that much more transactional. Actually, Hyrule's very mythos is degrading. Link himself is forgotten by many, as though his own legend disintegrated with the Master Sword, and the people are no longer able to recognize their own beloved heroine. Heck, insofar as no one talks about it, there isn't really even a Triforce anymore. And as such, it kind of feels like Hyrule's noble spirit has been submerged, as symbolized rather poetically by the somber shades of devout Hylian soldiers standing upon pedestals within an abyss, offering up their serviceable yet humble weapons, untarnished memories from the last era before the gloom took hold. If some of this feels unpleasantly familiar to you, well, it should. Symbolically, this game invokes many painfully familiar crises all at once. It is a crisis of the natural world, of cultural consensus, of belief, of bodily health, of leadership, and above all, a crisis of meaning and especially identity. In fact, Tears of the Kingdom goes well out of its way to reference several very serious problems which our own societies are currently facing, such as widespread addiction, stark ideological divides, pollution and waste, food scarcity, nefarious underworld organizations, and even loneliness and failing relationships. Herein, the figurative kingdoms of men have been torn apart at the seams, and its peoples rendered increasingly helpless, sickly, distracted, and divided.
Many people, including myself, have professed that Tears of the Kingdom is not a true Zelda game. Why might that be the case? It has a Master Sword, dungeons, monsters, sages.
Well, for now, I'll just say that I think Tears of the Kingdom wants to dissociate us from the effortless magic of the older titles. Not that it doesn't bring some of its own. It also wants to dissociate us from the simultaneous tranquil aimlessness and hard-earned victory of Breath of the Wild. Not that it lacks its own peaceful moments or satisfying victories. And yeah, I understand that every new Zelda game must introduce new strife, and in certain respects, Breath of the Wild was anything but happy and peaceful. None of the games were at all free of war, death, or strife. But I feel that Tears of the Kingdom in particular wants us to see that under the shadow of evil, peace, prosperity, and freedom are precarious, and that as long as we ignore the truest sources of evil, it'll just keep springing back up out of the ground like a weed, in a seemingly unending cycle of trauma, malice, and war. Breath of the Wild, the supposed last game in the timeline, gave us an apparent promise of peace, renewal, and eventual normalcy. Its ending suggested that something truly beautiful had finally been permitted, and still, Tears of the Kingdom came along and pulled the rug out, in many more ways than one. All of this current suffering is implied to be the result of the upheaval, a disaster which takes place during a fateful moment in which the Demon King, our symbol of disintegration, strife, and corruption, awakes from stasis in what is for him the future, moments before the Divine Princess, our symbol of unity, peace, and nurturance, awakes in what is for her the past. It is a disaster that transforms Hyrule as we know it, perhaps irreversibly. In this version of Hyrule, everything Link and the player have fought to achieve and preserve disappears in minutes. And the world, which many players were eager to revisit, is no longer the same.
And again, taking this in a less literal sense, the experience of Breath of the Wild is gone.
In the wake of this upheaval, things are sort of inverted and sort of shuffled. In Breath of the Wild, it was difficult to climb up, yet easy to descend. In Tears of the Kingdom, until the player gets the glider, it is difficult to climb down but easy to ascend. Treasures, items, monsters, gods, and NPCs spawn in new locations. Caves and wells have opened up everywhere. Maybe they are new, or maybe somewhat less literally they are newly salient. More on that later. Myriad objects are falling from the sky. The base is elevated and the heavens brought low. And as such we discover a new nadir, which is nothing less than a hellish black abyss. Again, these changes were in part affected by a restless, more or less inconspicuous malice, creeping beneath the cultural epicenters of Hyrule, pooling in the shadows, probing for weaknesses, and silently gathering strength. In every sense of the word, the malice is and was seeking to bring Hyrule down. It wants to make everything worse. One physical manifestation of this malice, the gloom, is a toxic life-sapping ooze. The gloom is just terrible in so many ways, but chiefly, it fortifies Ganon's assault by enfeebling Hyrule's defenses. No sooner than the gloom is unleashed, most of Hyrule's weapons and shields are ruined, and between the gloom sickness, the monsters, and the property damage, many of its warriors and laborers alike are deprived of tools, vehicles, dwellings, and vitality. Perhaps the gloom's worst offense, however, is its corruption of Link, when his sword arm is suddenly tainted by Ganon's evil, and his life force drained away. In other words, his independence, his skill in personal power, and indeed his identity is diminished. So, in addition to weakening the population, the Demon King essentially sought to disarm Hyrule's spiritual defenses by stripping its archetypal champion of his heroic status, painstakingly earned in Breath of the Wild, rendering him meek and unfit to wield the sacred blade, but perhaps also unfit or even unworthy of preserving the sacred kingdom, as symbolically demonstrated when he fails to catch Zelda.
Though, let's be honest, Link's version of meek is most people's version of unstoppable.
After the upheaval, elements of the past, present, and future are also somewhat remixed, and this concept is explored in numerous ways, metatextually, mechanically, symbolically, and also canonically. Here in this weird, topsy-turvy non-Zelda, the game asserts itself suddenly as both the first and last tale in the canon, and perhaps therefore the most important title, while simultaneously existing in what could very well be an alternate universe.
At least, it might be an alternate universe if canon matters, but I've talked a lot about Zelda canon in a previous video, so I'm not going to delve much further into that.
Fittingly, the journey begins within an age-fractured, floating autumnal paradise referred to as the Garden of Time. Here, Link dons the garb of a prehistoric warrior and begins Hyrule's and the player's abrupt relationship with an entirely forgotten past, likely predating even Skyward Sword on the timeline, and therefore suggesting that the world of Tears of the Kingdom, of the Demon King, the first human queens, and the mysterious Zonai is so far removed from what we might consider to be relevant history that even the ancient world has forgotten it. Though we quickly learn that something of its legend has not only endured, but merged with the present. Rife with psychological and mythological symbolism, the Garden of Time evokes formative cultural touchstones from our own history, as Link wanders through a lofty paradise, replete with apples, notoriously associated with death, rebirth, divinity, and knowledge, including golden apples, associated with godhood and immortality in many cultures. All around are miraculous robots, floating structures, and flying vessels, reminiscent of tales from ancient Greece, India, China, Egypt, and Mesopotamia, to name a few. And of course, Link is also met with the spectre of Rauru, a prominent paternal godlike figure who serves as a kind of guardian, mentor, and tutor. This peaceful yet dangerous realm provides a conceptual playground, inviting us to imagine all manner of possibilities, stirring a prehistoric, hardwired blend of confusion, anxiety, vigilance, pleasure, and curiosity. In a way, we find ourselves within something that feels almost like a return to kindergarten. After losing everything familiar, we're suddenly lost in this garden, totally out of our depth, but also sort of loved and protected. Surrounded by life-giving apples, friendly tutors, and fun, wacky toys which teach us gently but viscerally how to thrive within Link's current reality. And, like a young student, within the very first minutes the player is almost certainly met with dozens of stimulating questions. For instance, what is this place? Was it always here? Why are we here? How do we get down? Are we in the past, present, or future? Does time work the same way up here? Is this technically a part of Hyrule? Where is Zelda? Where is Ganondorf? Could this be connected to Skyloft, the Cloud Tops, or other canonical sky realms? How does this place connect with Breath of the Wild's lore? Is this place in any way related to the sacred realm, the Triforce, or the goddesses? Where did the Zonai come from? What are the Zonai? When did they arrive? Were they always here? Who was the ancient warrior? Hey, what's that thing? Will it hurt us? What happens if we do this? And finally, once we master and indeed tire of this terrain, the selfsame place that filled us with such immense intrigue and wonder mere hours beforehand, Link's long-anticipated descent is as thrilling as it is disorienting. Perhaps intentionally, once he departs from the tutorial continent, at first it's hard to discern whether he's landed in the past, present, or future. The player is positioned in such a way that the world appears strangely empty, and the landscape surprisingly unfamiliar, and it all feels sort of vulnerable. Link used to be a big fish in a little pond. Through the player and community, he'd conquered the elements, maxed out his stamina and health, accumulated many powers. But now, once again, he is a little fish inside a vast pond, whose rules differ from those of the previous pond, despite many superficial similarities. Much like the original Legend of Zelda's second quest, the player finds herself within a repurposed landscape. New and familiar obstacles spawn side by side. Well-loved villages overflow with unusual characters and unexpected objects. The familiar provinces of Breath of the Wild are emphasized and delineated differently. The game shuttles the player in novel directions, inciting her to explore locations and ideas alike in a dizzying, unprecedented order. This too beseeches our curiosity. The player is invited to look again with new eyes. Suddenly, he is asked to revisit history, to re-examine and question what is known, and, above all, to challenge his assumptions about what is possible. When the game begins, most, including the player, must cope with the humblest of equipment. Rupees are overall harder to find, therefore so are supplies, and there's a sense that everyone is just working that much harder to make ends meet in this new Hyrule. But it doesn't stay that way for long. Times surely are tough, but overall the free peoples of Hyrule have not given up. Still they have spirit. Still they have hope. Still they have courage. And, perhaps not so surprisingly, The most community-oriented among them remain quite cognizant of Link's past deeds. Tears of the Kingdom also demonstrates that within such irreverent and dangerous worlds, acts of kindness shine through all the brighter. As was the case with the calamity in Breath of the Wild, hitting that rock bottom sort of brought out the best in many. In fantasy and in life, there is an undeniable value in upheaval. Sometimes a crisis forces new perspectives, forces new ideas, and, at its best, reminds us of our most cherished values, of what it means to be human, and of the incalculable importance of teamwork.
However, all too often radical change comes with a heavy price tag, and innovations are not automatically beneficial.
Ganon, for instance, did not allow the good crisis to go to waste, and amid the chaos took pains to augment and fortify his minions. Now, suddenly, it's a free-for-all, where anyone can gain the upper hand in warfare, finance, or even politics by learning to adapt. More people are learning to fight also. It's very much a do-it-yourself culture. But there is a novel freedom in this world, where technology is accessible to anyone savvy enough to wield it, and everyone can be a pioneer, reaching for the heavens, scouting the land, and plunging into the depths. Ad hoc technology is very important in this setting, as Hylians have taken to scavenging and are gradually learning innovative ways of defending their homes and enriching their livelihoods. There's an emphasis, therefore, on tempering opposites, combining the natural with the unnatural, the holy with the unholy, and the old with the new. Many harness and indeed rely upon the strengths of the natural world, but also pre-existing human inventions, heavenly artifacts, and even monster parts. Creativity, that is, thinking outside the established norms, is perhaps the ultimate strength in this setting. Those who can combine technology, ideas, items, and tools in innovative ways have a decisive advantage. In fact, this is another thing that's mirroring our own present-day world. Right now, at this very moment, human beings are simultaneously plunging headfirst into novel, uncharted waters, psychologically, biologically, and technologically, whilst gravitating, conversely, towards tried-and-true, old-fashioned habits, rediscovering the production of food and medicine, even learning to weave cloth and manufacture basic supplies, for which our great-grandparents would indeed be relieved. We're a culture of opposites, and it seems that the more we shoot for the stars, the more we're inevitably forced to re-examine the basics, and vice versa, because stagnation also necessitates change. Tears of the Kingdom suggests that combining these past and future elements is not only powerfully useful, but perhaps inherently virtuous. Each step of the way, at every cultural milestone, during every war, and every revolution, and every renaissance, humanity has re-examined itself on all levels, spiritually, morally, philosophically, scientifically, economically, artistically. Change invariably brings about reflection, and reflection invariably brings about change.
I'm going to go off on a crazy tangent for a second here.
Through its many colorful species and cultures, fantasy fiction tends to depict 4 prominent stages of human evolution, often allegorically parsed as conflicted aspects of our natures, body and soul alike. The first mode is that of the monster, a lower level of consciousness, usually violent, overall self-interested, and devoid of empathy, seeking power and survival above all else. When these beings develop a meaningful degree of intelligence, they sometimes form basic hierarchies to survive their otherwise chaotic natures. Once those hierarchies become sufficiently complex, however, laws and even inklings of morals tend to emerge, and something of a communal spirit arises. If that species maintains an equilibrium long enough, then we get the second mode, which is an overall benign yet primitive mode, in other words, the noble savage. But often we see these fictional cultures in more elevated forms. Various types of harmonious, natural, often naive beings are frequently depicted in sci-fi and fantasy, and they tend to be highly idealized. In Zelda, for instance, we see this primarily in the elemental species, which I've discussed at length in previous videos. In some cases, we see an extremely advanced or even godlike culture that has managed to evolve and thrive peacefully within nature without much technology, or has returned to nature with magic and/or technology. But very frequently, such beings are shown as being in conflict with what we would think of as civilization. I actually think that's because we humans have more or less evolved to live like that. Magic aside, in many respects, this mode is really what the hardware wants and expects. But unfortunately, said hardware doesn't quite support what we've become, which happens to be the third mode. The third mode is more similar to present-day humans, advanced in technology, philosophy, and the procurement of wealth, but also quite corruptible and highly subject to baser instincts. Sometimes we're wise, compassionate, far-sighted, intelligent thinkers, and sometimes we're just innocent, curious, hapless little critters, and sometimes we're violent, rapacious monsters. But we're still evolving, and I personally think that we're evolving into something a lot more similar to the fourth mode, which I will represent with the Zonai, or maybe the Sheikah of the past, who appear to have successfully integrated biology, technology, and spirituality. Well, I hope so anyway, because the Zonai are basically living in a kind of Star Trek-style utopia.
Though without adhering to the temporal prime directive.
Star Trek's promise, believe it or not, is no more about the thrill of new horizons than it is a return to the simplicity once offered by nature, but without the unnecessary toil and hardship. Instead, many cultures live in post-scarcity environments, freeing humanity and other species to pursue self-betterment and passionate interests, to enjoy peaceful coexistence, great health, and intellectual, creative, and athletic pastimes, all of which are things human bodies desperately crave but rarely have time for due to various conflicting drives which more or less kick in the moment we lose our creature comforts. But at least according to Star Trek, in order to achieve that kind of future, paradoxically, we first need to achieve peace and freedom within ourselves, by overcoming closed-mindedness, paranoia, greed, and aggression, one person at a time. Star Trek suggests that society is transformed from the inside out, and that such liberating technologies would never become publicly available within a greedy, fearfully unstable culture, and that we're simply not ready for the Zonai experience until we can address that horrible, grasping, paranoid, petty, vengeful little bokoblin with sticky fingers that is most definitely within us all. Personally, I believe that for a long time now the Zelda series has been trying to relay a similar message to Star Trek. Not that Zelda is alone in this, of course. Really, we see it in all the great fantasy stories. Most of them fully acknowledge that power requires wisdom, and that courage, compassion, and humility are the bane of wrath, arrogance, and greed. Characters like Princess Zelda, Rauru, and Minoru, for instance, are model Starfleet citizens. These people, along with the games themselves, encourage us all, literally, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before, and to face challenges with an open mind, to explore ideas from all sides and all angles, and even occasionally to ally with enemies. In fact, the greatest civilizations in the Zelda universe are founded upon these attitudes of humility, cooperation, and mutual respect. And overall, it has carried them through the ages. For instance, Rauru's culture, while irrefutably more advanced than those of other sages, does not seek to dominate others. Instead, they appear to share technology with others, courageously, I might add, while honoring and perhaps even protecting others' individuality. This is precisely the opposite of Ganondorf's idea of leadership.
I will crush any opposition. I will rule. That is what a king must do.
The Zelda franchise, as with Star Trek, understands that a truly wise leader foremost uplifts and empowers himself by uplifting and empowering others. The sages, notably most effective whilst gathered, are frequently depicted as spiritually, biologically, and culturally diverse, and this is seen as a strength. Each culture offers unique perspectives, resources, and skill sets. Meanwhile, Hyrule's greatest pitfalls are invariably the result of prejudice, callous egotism, and hubris. The Bokoblin in Zant, who is led by cruel ambition, the Bokoblin in Ganondorf, who is a slave to spite, even the Bokoblin in King Hyrule, who refuses to consider the sage words of his daughter. But talking about enlightenment is all well and good. One might ask, let alone a society, how can even one person achieve that sage-like level of consciousness? For my part, I really don't know. If history tells us anything, sages are indeed very rare. And the Zelda games would agree. Actually, most of our stories agree on this point. Enlightenment, whatever that means to you or I, is seldom casually achieved. And most agree there are no shortcuts.
But perhaps there are signposts that can point us in the right direction.
The Zelda series, while not outwardly focused on the pursuit of higher consciousness for its own sake, does suggest that higher consciousness sometimes results from the pursuit of virtue. In each game in the series, Link and the player must inevitably dedicate themselves to bettering the world around them. But the narrative also implies a degree of sincerity therein. In most of the games, Link's not just ticking off boxes, getting prizes and accumulating resources, nor is he sitting around brooding about how ungrateful everyone is for his services. For him, the good deed really is its own reward. And this is kind of true for the player as well. A lot of the time, seeing things put to right, seeing families reunited, landscapes replenished, threats averted, or villages restored, is the primary reward. For many, the prize is secondary, and those very prizes are eventually, if not immediately, put towards some other benevolent use. Yeah, the player might simply be in it for the gameplay. For the player, at least, the gameplay is also its own reward. But in the context of Zelda, and a lot of other fantasy games for that matter, a significant portion of us have been haunted by thoughts of those NPCs we could not help, or by the people we had to hurt along the way, or by the benevolent choices we could have made. These sorts of things are typical deathbed thoughts. Usually, when we strip away material concerns, when we're forced to acknowledge time's limitations, at last we'll look into the mirror. At last, we'll meet our true selves and, sometimes, see the world for what it might have been. Had we only been a little more generous, or a little braver, a little more honest, or perhaps a little more free, a little less concerned with small insignificant things, maybe a little less inhibited, a little more creative. These sorts of blockages, many inevitably realize, serve as shackles, paralyzing us in delusion, fear, selfishness, and arrogance. Basically, the opposite of higher consciousness and enlightenment. The opposite of a sage or a Starfleet officer. The Zelda series communicates this beautifully. Link, like the various holy knights and indeed sorcerers of legend on which he is partially based, is granted access to the sacred realm through moments of replete selflessness. But I don't just simply mean being a good person, like not just choosing to act with kindness, courage, and humility, although this is important, but also submitting himself utterly to the eternal vastness of existence, by allowing the self to disappear for a while. Throughout the series, Link's spirit becomes so flexible as to merge with the metaphorical firmware of reality. If the player chooses to level him up through acts of self-sacrifice and indeed dreamy, mind-expanding labors, then he can become his true or higher self, whose nature is, there again, metatextual. Of course, this is the 21st century, so on the whole we're skeptical of the sacred realm, even though there is little else we desire more than to get outside of this realm, and outside of ourselves. But true skeptics do possess another flexible and, dare I say, heavenly attribute: imagination. Accordingly, in Tears of the Kingdom, Link, as ever the exemplar of Hyrule's virtue, attains near limitless capacity for innovation and creativity because he is you. You are a god as compared with Link, who is himself a god as compared with the NPCs. Hyrule 2.0 wants you to be the embodiment of ingenuity, resilience, and curiosity. It wants you to explore, through Link, the very limits of imagination. It challenges you, the jaded, physics-altering, speed-running, hacking, modding, minimaxing, maximinning, spelunking 21st century pioneers, to venture into every nook and cranny on your quest, not to save, but rather to find the lost legend. To find, through imagination, that thing which perhaps once brought you such joy, and such freedom, and such peace.
I need to talk about the goddesses for a moment, what they are symbolically and especially in this case metatextually.
I've already examined this subject at length in my other videos, but to summarize the former question, I think the goddesses, collectively and apart, are vessels for the virtues of the ages, representing the wholeness and purity of civilization, and notably are symbols for the relationship between ego consciousness and unconsciousness, especially collective unconsciousness. If that sounds in any way foreign or confusing, I might suggest watching the previous 2 or 3 episodes of the series, where I examined the gods and archetypes, the interplay between divine masculinity and divine femininity, and the various sacred realms, underworlds, and otherworlds in the series. Personally, I think that at least the previous 2 videos will significantly complement the subtexts presented within this video. So, moving on to metatextual symbolism, in this case, the impact of Hyrule's divine characters and themes on the player's modes of consciousness and overall sense of reality, and his or her simultaneous engagement through Tears of the Kingdom or other titles with the game's literal texts and subtexts, with the series as a whole, and with the player's dynamic, archetypally bound relationships with the games themselves. Actually, I'm just going to jump boldly ahead here and ask you to momentarily imagine a context in which you, the gamer, are Link, and the franchise itself is the goddess, in all her unifying multiplicity. And as we engage with her content, as we parse her story, as we embody her hero, we are very much entering her miraculous imaginal domain. This domain exists on multiple layers, physically, conceptually, and spiritually. Indeed, literally within the games themselves, but also outside of them, within our culture and especially within our own minds, as we recall and parse them, and as the kaleidoscope of imagination that is the collective consciousness churns out infinite permutations of the legend, and everything that comes with it. Even now, as I speak, all those links, all those millions of players embodying those links are here together, within the divine timelessness of Hylia's realms.
This is also, of course, not meant to be taken literally, but in order to communicate my thoughts, we must venture further into liminal territory.
What I hope to illustrate here is that a massive, long-standing franchise like The Legend of Zelda is in many ways a kind of interactive liminal realm, embedded within the zeitgeist, evolving alongside its creators, fans, and all other participants. Zelda's influence upon us and our influence upon Zelda are inextricably linked. The more we engage with it, the more it embeds itself in our consciousness on all levels, and the more this kaleidoscope feeds into itself, mingling with various public, personal, and shared experiences, thoughts, dreams, memories, memes, icons, and archetypal symbols, as we surreptitiously implied last year during Games Done Quick. This process creates and recreates us and the franchise alike. In short, we are evolving together. Yes, some of you will find this corny, but we are, in fact, here together. You would not have clicked on this video were this not so.
Anyway, where am I going with this?
Well, what the games at their best can give to us is roughly similar to that which Link receives from the goddess. Peace, inner freedom, inspiration, music, encouragement, compassion, challenge and victory. The boon of these games is quite similar to that of, say, the Queen of the Fairies, or the goddesses Frigg, Mat, Athena, Chamunda Shakti, or other mythical feminine figures who inspire and reward bravery, valor, and righteousness, at least inwardly, by foremost igniting our imaginations with marvelous possibilities. But just as Link must gradually condition and purify himself to deepen his interaction with the sacred realm, so too must the player condition himself to visit, or in the case of long-term fans, revisit the sacred version of Hyrule. Because there's more than one Hyrule, not just throughout separate games, but even within the same games. For instance, every time you play Ocarina of Time, you're entering a slightly different experience. Your mood varies, your level of absorption varies. You might enjoy the Forest Temple most and Jabu Jabu least on your second playthrough. Then on your fifth playthrough, maybe you love the Shadow Temple and hate the Ice Cavern. Maybe you start playing it again after not touching it for 15 years because you want to show it to someone else. And then their reaction to it changes the experience. Maybe you've lost someone precious in that space of time, and suddenly, Sheik's words are hitting harder. It's the exact same cartridge, but it feels totally different now, because you have changed. Well, I'm sure I don't need to explain that this is not just the case with video games. Everything in life is like this. People are like this, music is like this. Ever revisit a song whose lyrics used to annoy you, but now suddenly you get it? Really, all of life is just a non-stop progression of opening up doors within the mind. You can never close them again, but you also never run out of doors. The thing is, some of those doors feel sacred. They feel nourishing or refreshing. They feel inspiring, or they are full of meaning and synchronicity. I think that if you've watched this far into the video, there's a good chance you've stepped through one of these sacred doors, perhaps directly into one of the sacred versions of Hyrule. Especially if you're a longtime fan, you might already understand what I'm getting at. Or maybe you've experienced it with something else, some other myth or story or event or life-changing mystery.
I'd like to take a moment to talk about Shigeru Miyamoto's Cave. Most of you will have already heard some version of this story, but I'd like to summarize it for those who haven't.
The creator of Legend of Zelda, Shigeru Miyamoto, was raised within a humble household in a remote rural environment. As a child, he often entertained himself by crafting his own toys out of meager supplies, such as wood and string, by fantasizing about hidden realms behind screened doors or within forests and graveyards, and by exploring shrines, beaches, and other natural environments. One day, while wandering alone, a young Shigeru happened upon a cave. Though frightened, he eventually convinced himself to venture inside. Finding it too dark to see, he returned the following day with a lantern, whereupon he discovered a subsequent opening leading to a second room within the cave. For Miyamoto, this moment was intimidating, exhilarating, and nothing short of life-altering, forming the basis of his creative endeavors for many decades to come. He described the experience as a primary inspiration for both Mario and Zelda. As far as the child Miyamoto's mind was concerned, he may as well have entered another world altogether. He saw something eternal in that moment, in which his reality seemed so very similar to mythology, and he was shown the dichotomies of fear and courage, mystery and discovery. This was a liminal experience, an uncanny moment.
When I was around 4 years old, I feel that I had something of a comparable experience. We had moved to a house where there was a large forest in the backyard very recently, and my brother and I occasionally went to explore it. I became extremely curious about this forest. I thought about it all the time. It very much became a part of me, really a part of my personal mythos, my very identity. But I was afraid to explore this forest without my older brother. One day, I ventured to the bottom of the garden, and my mind was ringing with all sorts of stories about goblins and monsters and fairies. I was very intimidated by this dark wood, but I decided that I needed to enter it by myself. So I stepped inside, every step more fearful than the last, and I was thinking about all these creatures that must have been lurking in the bushes in the underbrush. And suddenly, I heard this rustling beside me, and I became very frightened, and I thought, I just knew. There is a goblin. I knew it. And suddenly, my cat leapt out of the bushes, and I realized that she had followed me quite a distance into the wood, and it was very funny and very comforting, and I felt suddenly that I had a friend in this place, and this cat had been drafted into my quest, and I never forgot that moment. I took it with me for the rest of my life. It's folded into everything that I do and everything that I am. This brief second where I truly believed that something otherworldly was real, that it was near me. I have the memory of that total belief, and it sort of formed the basis for my creative endeavors and much of who I am to this day.
It was Miyamoto's wish to share that experience with modern children, and in a lot of ways he succeeded. Some of us took something truly life-changing from his video games, something unexplainable. For some of us, it could even potentially be described as something holy. Playing Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, and Ocarina of Time with my brother in early childhood was a feeling like no other. It changed me. It made me a much more creative person, and I think it caused me to think more fluidly, to examine and question everything I saw, and to expect the unexpected. Mind you, it also blended seamlessly into the mythos shared between my brother and I. Thanks to our parents, we had already received a wealth of inspiration and joy from the likes of Peter Pan, Robin Hood, and King Arthur, and many other tales of great heroes, exciting adventures, and enchanted landscapes. When we entered our forest, we were also entering those lands, because these stories thrived in us. Then, Zelda came along and made connections between them all. And the adventure felt even more complete and more meaningful. Suddenly, my mum's stories about the Celtic underworld were made real on the screen. And Link was King Arthur, chosen by the legendary sword. He was Peter Pan, living in the woods with fairies and eternal children. He was Robin Hood, sneaking into the palaces of tyrants and liberating his friends. He was also us, acting as we would act. As we entered those dungeons together, worked through their puzzles, amazed by the mystery, music, atmosphere, and danger. It's like All of this installed something within me. It grew inside me, and it's still growing to this day. And like Miyamoto, I want to give it back. Throughout my life, I've needed to express and share this magic with as many people as possible. And I suspect some of you will understand this maddening urge. Like Miyamoto, some of us have seen something eternal, maybe with the help of Zelda or other fantasy, and it becomes a part of us, and at one time or another in our lives, we've longed for others to see what we've seen, to hear what we've heard, to feel what we have felt. Some of us have booted up a game or two and have entered that secret Hyrule. The one that's just a little more personal, just a little more beautiful, just a little more...
Well, if I had the words to say it, I would have said it years ago.
That's what's offered in Hyrule, or perhaps I should say in Hylia, whose domain is legend, inviting us not just to play, but if we are willing, to feel such wonder, to hear such music, to see such beauty. The goddess of this imaginal realm, not within the cartridge, not within the disc, but within our own willing minds, beckons us, pleads with us, and challenges us to awaken to the free and unfiltered delight of the sacred realm, to hear and to answer the call, which at one time or another, and at least on some level, most, if not all of us have longed to hear. My prediction is that a small handful of you will recognize this feeling immediately, relating to it deeply and on a highly personal level. A few more will have never felt it, or might even find it silly, a mite too Canadian and whimsical. But a significant portion, I suspect, will recognize it, but in a vague and distant way. Perhaps relating it to childhood, or to happier days, or to the occasional dreamy impulse which seems to come from nowhere, passing over like a cloud before it fades back out again. Perhaps a fleeting urge to write or draw, a brief, painful softening of the heart, or a lovely, sudden clarity of experience. For half a second, maybe there's a magical feeling of interconnectedness, or a wide, unblemished joy. That sacred, ineffable feeling, the sacred realm, sacred Hyrule, sacred Avalon and Camelot, sacred Valinor and Middle-earth, the Force, the Triforce, the strange new horizon, the crystals and the Mana Sanctuary, the Zohar and the Frozen Flame. None of this ever lived on the screen or on the page. It all lives truly inside you and me, and every other mind it touches. But sometimes the mind ceases to feel that touch, no matter how hard one tries, and more often than not, one attempts to seek its renewal, either by upping the dose or through nostalgia, neither of which are particularly effective, because as we, the fanbase, grow rapidly older, for us, Zelda will never be new again. We will never again experience Link to the Past, or Ocarina of Time, or Twilight Princess, or Breath of the Wild for the first time.
Now, here's where it gets back to Tears of the Kingdom. I think the game's premise is highly aware of this fact.
The imposter Zelda's unusual behavior certainly reflects this idea. Everyone talks about how she is suddenly not herself. She is the wrong Zelda. She is not the legend, but merely bears the appearance of the legend. Meanwhile, Breath of the Wild Zelda, being the heart and indeed the titular goddess of its universe, cannot remain the same in a changed world. Hence the player's quest to locate her rather than to rescue her. The question throughout, literally and figuratively, is, where is Zelda? Really, where is the goddess? Or even more bluntly, where has the legend gone? Where has the myth gone? Where has the magic gone? Where has that feeling gone? Of course, it's not gone, not really. It's transformed, But to find Zelda, the player first needs to understand what they're searching for.
I think, personally, the game encourages the player to contemplate the discrepancy between one's lived experiences and one's expectations of reality.
Here's an example. Kilton's much creepier little brother, Colton, a literal pale shadow of Kilton, is obsessed with the idea of transforming himself, physically I note, into a Satori. Of course, he wants to perceive himself as something very opposite to his actual nature. The Satori appear to be ephemeral spirits, similar to kami or other mythical creatures from folk tales, who are not, and likely cannot be, fully tied to a physical existence as mortals understand it. But Colton is obsessed with becoming something which is, by its very nature, immaterial. Let's think about that from a psychological standpoint. What do fantasy creatures represent? All manner of things. Power, mystery, grace, transformation. But perhaps above all, they represent the impossible, that which is eternally external to the mundane, and therefore cannot be unremarkable and cannot degrade. Perceiving them thus connects us with eternity, by connecting us with something which is outside of ourselves, something that is permanently beyond the horizon. But for a very long time anyway, Colton doesn't quite understand this. That his true wish is to escape his reality, which is synonymous with escaping himself, a limited physical being. So, rather than observing and appreciating the delicate spirits for what they are, a permanently other reality, rather than holding space for them internally, he is consumed with a livid, manic desire to possess their essence. Colton believes, in order to undertake this transformation, he must consume rare artifacts known as bubble gems. However, he cannot find these items anywhere, so he asks the player to deliver them. As such, he gorges himself on bubble gems, demonstrating a consuming and grasping attitude in the face of this divine and fleeting phenomenon. And for a very long time, nothing happens. Frustrated by the apparent slowness of his transformation, he entreats the player to fetch as many bubble gems as possible, believing that if he simply consumes enough quantity of the magic, then it will inevitably transform his life into something which is permanently magical. He, like so many others, is seeking something more meaningful, something transcendent and otherworldly. He wants to live inside Miyamoto's cave, perhaps because he cannot find his own cave, his own magic. So he has the player repeating that magical moment ad nauseum. Find the magic cave. Maybe one of them will be the right one. Maybe one of them will be Miyamoto's cave. Finally, he decides that he must consume all of the world's bubble gems. Then he can be happy. So Link kindly delivers the remaining gems, which the game aptly presents as a kind of currency. After devouring all the currency, Colton does indeed transform, but in the end, I was left wondering, did he actually escape himself because of the gems? Or did he escape because he stopped seeking the gems? Did we run out of caves, or did Colton stop looking for them? At first, it seemed like he did not want to respect or learn from the magic of eternity. He simply wanted to consume it rapidly and hungrily forever. He wanted to engage with it superficially, relishing one hit after another. But then, after a while, maybe he found his way. Maybe the friendship with Link was what he truly needed. Or, ironically, letting go of that feeling of needing a quest or a purpose. I suspect he probably craved the searching, the waiting, the exploration, the interactions with Link. But then, one day, he was finally done with it. Somewhere along the way, he'd seen something eternal of his own. He looked at last into the mirror, and he was done. Much like Legend of Zelda fans, or fantasy fans more generally, many are tempted to imbibe more and more of whatever content in pursuit of the magic we once felt, rather accidentally. But we are all too often looking for it in the wrong places. Indeed, no amount of spin-off materials, sequels, fan tributes, or merchandise could ever fully recreate the magical experiences we once felt, because every layer of context surrounding it is in constant motion. More often than not, us fans are reconnected to this very different but similarly ephemeral phenomenon when we're just not really looking for it. When we're just being. For me, Breath of the Wild itself was a sterling example. I didn't really have any expectations of the game going in, yet it ended up capturing my affections in an entirely unanticipated way, and I regularly look back on those moments and smile. That first time I sped away on a horse on a bright sunny day, and that peculiar music started up. And then, suddenly, it started raining. It was so peaceful, and it felt so accidental. That moment could just as easily have never happened. Or the first time I encountered Cass on the beach at sunset, and I was filled with curiosity. Or when I suddenly found the Korok Forest. The first time I saw one of the dragon gods in the distance, and I wondered for a long time whether it would be a friend or a foe. I especially recall the first time I came upon a stable, and I literally exclaimed with delight at its colorful, joyous, and entirely unexpected scene. It felt so good to finally encounter other Hylians. And of course, the first time I saw the ruins of Hyrule Castle, and felt so strongly the despair of not only Princess Zelda, but her father as well. However, as strange as this may sound, I don't think that Breath of the Wild was ever actually the reason for any of these incredible moments within my own life. And that, if I were to look a little deeper, and honor the very messages embedded within the series, the point of all of this was to express the wonder of existence, which, ultimately, cannot be grasped, cannot be controlled, cannot even be fully understood, despite the efforts of innumerable spelunkers. The magic of Zelda, and perhaps especially Breath of the Wild, is like wind in a sail. It's eternally mysterious, but if the conditions are right, it just happens. The fake Zelda, meanwhile, has all the answers, and reveals them eagerly. Of course, she imparts false, malicious advice, disseminating slander and strife, and repeatedly leading Link, the player, and many others away from truth and general well-being. This is a narrative device, but it can also be seen as further indication of the myth being forgotten or absent, and of a search for meaning in all the wrong places. The fake Zelda appears all over the surface of Hyrule. She is very obvious and very visible. The true heart of the adventure, however, the true Zelda, looks and behaves very differently from what we expected, and must be exhumed from beneath the earth and glimpsed above the clouds. Furthermore, Link can neither fully understand nor fully relate to this expression of the goddess, until he has subjected himself to the divine. Only then is he able to fully grasp the nature of her transformation.
Almost everything truly magical and transcendent about Tears of the Kingdom is owed to Breath of the Wild.
Its landscape, the majority of its monsters and characters, most of its best songs, its gods, its gameplay, and much of its lore. Otherwise, in certain respects, Tears of the Kingdom's Hyrule is almost ordinary, getting increasingly banal, ugly, and mundane, creeping closer to our own world. You know, that thing many of us have been trying so hard to escape. But, in contrast, the Underworld and the Sky are just spectacularly magical. It felt like the game withheld most of its magic, like it saved up all of its punches for this one moment. Actually, the only subsequent thing that managed to top that for me was this one. Underworld and The Sky contain equally transcendent, bizarre, and mind-bending elements. Both are rife with technological wonders. Both reveal a puzzling spatial layer of history, furthest reaching above, below, after, and before. And both present the player with copious exotic, hellish, and heavenly plants, bestowing a variety of magical, medicinal, and elemental powers, and also some nice culinary choices. In Hyrule, as I've also described, thematic underworlds such as the Dark World or Lorule have a complex origin, and are entangled thoroughly with the Sacred Realm, as well as Hyrule itself. But in order to properly convey the beauty, symbolism, and complexity of the literal and figurative layers presented in Tears of the Kingdom, I will need to dissect this idea a little further. The concept of the special realm, present in most forms of fantasy fiction, very often blurs the ideas of traveling into dreams, heavens and hells, alternate timelines, universes and realities, or even the realms of the gods. In the Zelda series in particular, the concept of a descent into the depths, symbolically anyway, is not entirely dissimilar from the notion of ascent unto the heavens, or of shifting laterally between extraordinary modes, or otherwise of traveling within. These transitional journeys are communicated in myriad ways, ranging from altered state sequences to uncanny sprawling caves, to miraculous floating islands, to eerie sandstorms, to beguiling forests, to deep waters, to perplexing shrines and temples, to alternate universes, mirror dimensions, holographic projections, veils of shadow, or realms of pure essence.
Sometimes we're exploring a dungeon within a dungeon, other times it's a dream within a dream, or a dream within a dungeon, or a dungeon within a dream.
But whatever we're calling it, entering the magic, so to speak, is more often than not a multi-stage process, wherein physical, psychological, spiritual, and metatextual lines are indistinct at best, teasing us away from the ordinary. Sometimes this means we're going up, other times we're going down, sometimes we're expanding, other times we're shrinking, but always, truly, we're going within. In a very literal canon, naturally these places and experiences are almost entirely separate things. Koholint Island, for instance, is, according to the literal text, the dream of the windfish, and nothing more. Though, does that mean Link is dreaming the windfish is dreaming Link, or both? Are we dreaming Link's awakening by playing it? It's still kind of fuzzy. Let's try Lorule then. Is it a highly personal, subjective experience to enter a dark reflection of your own reality? Or is this just a place you can go if you have the right equipment? Is Termina related to Hyrule in any way? Or is it just a place that you might end up if you get lost in the forest?
I say yes to all of the above.
Every layer of these intricately nested, multifaceted expeditions mirrors the process of tapping into the subconscious. It's not a coincidence that Link begins each journey by first entering an uncanny domain, such as a nightmare, a forest, or a cave, and then subsequently wakes up to find that his reality has altered, and that, invariably, the impersonal, external situations into which he is drafted visit systematically upon his internal conflicts, and sometimes by proxy ours as well. We start the file, the curtain rises, the fourth wall begins to manifest, and deeper we are guided. Of course, there's always some official reason that we're entering this enchantment. Sometimes Link experiences a dream alerting him to the encroachment of the magic. Other times he is summoned by it directly. In the case of Tears of the Kingdom, there is a metaphorical blockage at the heart of the nation, buried where few can see, whispering omens that only the most sensitive can hear. Zelda, being an avatar of deeper, more transcendent wisdom, is our canniest listener, so the girl has an inkling that something feels off. The goddess of the realm, meanwhile, understands that this metatextual blockage imposes upon our collective connection to the sacred realm, Hyrule's and ours. Indeed, the goddess senses that the joys of Breath of the Wild were not enough. We're still not fulfilled. We're still gloomy. Thus, Link needs further adventure, further expeditions, because this makes us happy. For a while. And thus, there must be a reason. There has to be some conflict that we have yet to visit. Some niggling puzzle that we have yet to solve. Some new wonder yet to witness. What are we looking for? Is it a hat? Is it a memory? Is it a wonderful new friend? But this time the goddess of the realm takes us down below, lower than ever before, that we might parse Hyrule's layered truths. And to our immediate satisfaction, we learned that Hyrule's so-called depths are vaster than we'd ever hoped. There is an entire universe of mystery down here, and it's only going to get bigger as the game opens up. Perhaps it's larger even than what we see in Tears of the Kingdom. Perhaps it is infinite. Ganondorf, the true Ganondorf, is also here, imprisoned by Rauru the King of Light, in a notably similar capacity to Loki of Norse mythology. Apparently he has been here all along, as though to say, "All this time you have ignored the truth of my existence, for you were looking merely at Hyrule's surface. You should now look beneath Hyrule, look beyond. Things are not, and indeed were never as they once appeared." Thank goodness. We almost thought we'd run out of mystery. Luckily, the gods took mercy upon us and turned everything upside down before we could get too cozy.
Thus bringing the player outside of himself. You know, the good stuff.
As usual, the Otherworld favors accomplished adventurers. Wonderful prizes are offered to those who overcome its strange trials and dizzying obstacles. But as many ancient peoples in real life and in Zelda were aware, crossing thresholds can be hazardous. The Otherworld's messages are encoded. Its creatures are uncategorizable, and its fruits are strange. For instance, many of the magical substances, as with the Zonai technologies strewn throughout the Underworld and Sky, can be quite destructive in the wrong hands. Perhaps this can be seen as a metaphor for the dual nature of higher consciousness, whose equal and opposite shadow is long and impenetrably mysterious. Certainly, creativity and higher reasoning can bring about wonders, but these same heavenly attributes can also conjure up horrors. The ancients knew very well, the more conscious one becomes, the more one brings the miracles into the light, the deeper and more overwhelming the mysteries one is eventually fated to confront. There's a reason that we unconsciously filter out almost every stray idea, almost every intuition, connection, sensation, association. Skilled sages have difficulty parsing the backstage portions of reality. Therefore, the very act of assimilating foreign abilities, unexplored thoughts, and new concepts directly into our awareness is tricky business, even for a pro like Link. All of his most powerful upgrades and abilities are obtained via this process, but it is never simple. We're warned about this in numerous ways throughout the series, that divine powers, much like the whims of human unconsciousness, are volatile, that without proper guidance, and especially without sufficient self-awareness, we may stray into unhelpful, addictive, or even perilous avenues. In some cases, we are possessed by our own personal sources of intoxicating gloom. For instance, in the modern era, in which unconscious exploration is outsourced, monetized, and deliberately curated within digital arenas, we spend excessive time scrolling through loops of anesthetizing distractions, ego validation, and other forms of temporary stimulation in an effort to address equally measured injections of fear, desire, and insecurity. This cycle of seeking and numbing perpetuates a state of psychological limbo. repeatedly exposing us to the poison, but without providing a viable pathway towards integrating or healing from these glooms. Presently, not unlike the gloom-addicted Gorons in Tears of the Kingdom, many of us are increasingly disinterested in relationships, work, and the well-being of community. Instead, we're idling upon a fatiguing threshold, neither fully restful nor fully productive, pleasured yet unfulfilled, neurologically stressed yet psychologically numbed. In some ways, I believe the Underworld and the Sky represent these two sides of modern cognition. On the one hand, everything has gone deeper underground. As we get more dissociated from our bodies, from the earth, and from each other, swallowed up into our apps and devices, distracted and transformed literally on a cognitive level, sometimes from ages at which our brains are still forming, much of our cognitive processes are becoming dangerously automatic and, again, outsourced. Now, our minds are not only influenced by, but integrated with technology, which provides a kind of extended cognition, spanning and infiltrating every conceivable layer of consciousness. At its best, however, all of this modern technology provides us with unprecedented insights, miraculous new ways of knowing, of seeing, of experiencing, and of navigating our environments as well as each other. And in many ways, this process really does feel like magic. Our ancestors certainly would have regarded it as such, though much of it would have seemed quite disturbing. Let me go on another tangent for a moment. In the past, a deeper connection to others and to nature was practically a given, integrated more or less seamlessly into our ancestors' daily lives. We would replenish ourselves with outdoor communal activities, song and dance, challenges and exercises, healthy natural food, and hours of downtime, storytelling, campfires, projects, stargazing, and, above all, uninterrupted private contemplation. Which is, funnily enough, not entirely dissimilar from the Star Trek experience. At one time, we had little choice but to think, but to experience, but to wonder, which is highly conducive to peak states of consciousness. Now, today, these kinds of altered states are still occurring, but we are outsourcing them unintentionally, relying on media, technology, and low-effort sources of dopamine to provide a sorely missed and highly necessary component of human experience, the Miyamoto experience, that was once just a daily aspect of our collective existence. And, as I've said before, when we lose sight of our unconscious, it tends to externalize in increasingly bizarre ways, and we become highly susceptible to external triggers, accidental or otherwise, that either remind us of an unmet need or brush against festering hurts, unconsciously overwhelming our capacity to parse reality by creating obsessions, aversions, phobias, and delusions.
This has always been the case, but nowadays it's getting weird.
Perhaps this will sound silly, but I think this contrast is well illustrated in the mayoral election subplot in Hateno Village. The old traditional mayor is in competition with the popular avant-garde designer Cici, whose designs, in every sense of the word, have begun spreading throughout the village and beyond. Her hallucinatory outfits resemble mushrooms, therefore associated with something which spreads and consumes rapidly. Cici's fanciful plans for the village notably do not include practical considerations such as resource management, agriculture, or the needs of the average layman, instead placing focus upon subjective concerns such as self-expression, lifestyle exploration, and deliberately upsetting the status quo. In other words, this is an obsession. This is not the way a healthy, well-integrated person behaves, regardless of talent. Meanwhile, however, the old mayor fails to understand that a significant portion of Hateno's residents enjoy Cici's more esoteric ideas, and are also actively interested in breathing new life into the village, experimenting both aesthetically and philosophically. While the elder mayor ultimately proves himself to be a better fit for the job, His aversion to Cece's aesthetic is partially stemming from a failure of imagination. While it is necessary to employ common sense and address immediate practical concerns, it's also important to address and integrate subjective concerns, and to imagine alternative possibilities. We should be challenged by the things we dislike from time to time. The influential nature of her design's popularity suggests that Cece is tapping into something that is both inflammatory and prescient. Something about her garish mushrooms, which I note somewhat resemble the landscapes found within Hyrule's abyss, is highly evocative. It's almost as though she has struck upon a nerve within society, or an undercurrent, perhaps one that has been there all along.
Sorry, this detour has many turns.
When Wordsworth translates the Zonai tablets, Zelda's account reveals that the ancient Hylians were weaving a very similar garb to Cece's mushroom clothes. And perhaps that should beg the questions. What else were they doing back then that's the same as today? How were we different and how were we the same? What important lessons have we learned since? What, conversely, have we forgotten? I found this interesting because this is equally true within our own world, in terms of culture, art, lifestyle, belief, and preference. We observe cyclical and even somewhat predictable patterns throughout history, as generations adapt to new technologies, invent new strategies, experience fluctuations in population, and recover from strife. It might even be true that every conscious, seemingly contemporary thought is steeped in countless generations of unconscious impulses. And it's conceivable that, provided with psychotechnologies such as language, mathematics, and higher art forms, our distant ancestors could have struck upon many of the same ideas. And I don't just mean technological inevitabilities either, but artistic inevitabilities, esoteric cultural movements. Cece's hat displays many disparate varieties of fungi bursting from the crown of its wearer. From a fashion standpoint, it's highly irregular, perhaps even ugly, depicting a jumbled, disorganized mess, that which we, as conscious thinkers, strive to arrange, temper, and study. But that very process gives way to the best ideas of them all. When we combine the primal with the contemporary, the intuitive with the logical, and the inspirational with the substantial, wonders are achieved. In order to keep the village in balance, Link must help to restore goodwill between Cece and the mayor, in the process causing them to combine their disparate ideas and talents, resulting in new, more interesting exports that enrich the culture and prosperity of not only Hateno, but eventually other settlements. This is the nature of upheaval. During transitional periods, such as the present day, many things, new and old alike, will crawl out from the underground. The deck is reshuffled, and it is seldom immediately clear which cards are best.
And if you gleaned any value from this little fashion detour, perhaps the fact that I teased all of that out of a comic relief accessory further demonstrates the purpose of Underworld exploration. If not, well, let me keep going.
The purpose of the journey is not truth or objectivity. Other worlds are, by nature, subjective. The purpose, rather, is insight. Every canny spelunker can find a treasure within the abyss, provided he understands its nature. The unconscious mind feels the patterns in the dark. Intuition travels towards them, repeatedly drawing connections between them until they become at least partially conscious. Then, a suitably rational mind translates and organizes them. Actually, this is exactly what Link does when he explores the depths. When the player first re-enters, everything is impossibly dark, but for the help of magical plants. That is, until she undertakes the process of remapping. Not only mapping the underworld, but remapping Hyrule, whose topography is now inverted, so this place is quite literally an uncanny valley, making it just that much clearer that, at least for the moment, intuition is primary and logic is secondary. Though, to get anywhere good, we really need both. The process of remapping requires Link to alight various human heart-shaped root clusters, referred to as light roots. each of which are positioned far beneath the ancient Zonai shrines of light. Though from a psychological perspective, perhaps we should think of them as beacons of salience, or even glimmers of lucidity. Although these objects appear organic in nature, in order to interact with them, Link must interface them with his Zonai light technology, after which point they pulse and hum with radiance, reorganizing the nearby soil into mathematically pristine patterns, sprouting with plants as though imbued with a miraculous fertility, and also healing the player of gloom sickness in the process. For Link and the player, the light roots provide a network of insight, beauty, and regeneration, recontextualizing the darkest and most chaotic abyss, making everything brighter and more yielding, sane, and logical in contrast. It is a needed contrast. Elsewhere, the depths teem with countless monsters, festering, mining, rearranging, polluting, and obfuscating. As with many previous titles, this apocalyptic world too reflects the problems on the surface, and has a mirror-like relationship with Link's native Hyrule, highlighting and reigniting the traumas of the past, appearing the same yet different, opposite yet similar. Symbolically, this could be seen as a macrocosm of a single person's mind, but also a representation of collective unconsciousness. In Tears of the Kingdom, everyone is affected by this underworld. Once again, this is true for the game and gamer alike. The metaphorical, or perhaps I should say metatextual substrate of caves and wells, and the abyss deeper still, imbue treasures from past games, including but not limited to lost equipment belonging to the hero of the wild. Notably, items pertaining to past incarnations of Link from older games are more likely to be found within the abyss, whereas Breath of the Wild's equipment most often appears closer to the surface. Again, this, to me anyway, invokes the idea that the underworld, the caves and wells, the dungeons, the game itself, the franchise, and indeed our subjective experience of the franchise is really just one huge, stratified, interconnected well. And perhaps, if we dare to journey just a little further, this can also represent a kind of universal well that is both organic and digital in nature. A yielding, malleable space of interconnected liminal consciousness. Perhaps the unusual placement of the Spirit Temple suggests this very idea. There we learn that Minoru, the scientist sage of the ancient world, has literally merged her memories and consciousness with an artificial intelligence. In this game, the element of spirit is represented neither physically nor even metaphysically but digitally, and instead of using a projected tulpa like the others, Minoru provides Link with a robot companion whose attachments, as with Link's equipment, are powerfully modular, emphasizing the importance of ingenuity as a bridge between spiritual and scientific domains. It almost feels like the game is acknowledging the modern nature of spirituality, which increasingly is both submerged and digitized. Halfway digital and halfway magical, the inventions of the Sheikah, the Zonai, and other mysterious ancient cultures within the franchise leave us curious about so many things. How does it all work? Where does the magic end and the science begin? What is history and what is legend? Of course, we'll never know. Otherwise, the mystery would end, and then it wouldn't really be Zelda anymore. From a psychological perspective, however, that is the purpose of the Zonai, the Sheikah, and all other impossibly strange cultures. They exist to keep us curious, by providing us with stories that are larger than ourselves. In a certain sense, that is the purpose of fantasy and sci-fi in general.
So we can get outside of ourselves.
On the one hand, we are invited to confront the mystery's insurmountability, which has the ironic side effect of enhancing speculation, skepticism, and logic. The impossible what demands a why and a how. On the other hand, conversely, we're invited to perceive ordinary things in magical ways. To forget whatever it is we think we understand about reality and accept mystery, passively and fluidly. This is a highly medicinal combination, especially in times like these at which the spirit is so submerged. Fantasy stories are conducive to this process in numerous ways. But since ancient times, those proficient in traversing mystical consciousness have repeatedly observed the unmatched potency of heroic archetypes in administering said medicine. Archetypes, when medicinally applied, that is, consciously and with virtuous intent, have long empowered us to change our lives, igniting our hearts, inspiring us towards action, conditioning us to observe subtler patterns, and challenging overly rigid perceptions. Cultural archetypes come and go, adopting myriad forms throughout the ages, but the ones that tend to stick with us have very ancient roots indeed, stretching deep into the collective consciousness, cycling through infinite forms, each bearing torches of intuition and reason, elucidating and contextualizing our infinite human conundrums, guiding us gently towards personal and societal integrity, rather like Link. Actually, this most modern version of Link in many ways reminds me of the ancient Irish legend of Nuada of the Silver Arm, who was the first warrior king of the Huhat de Danann, a supernatural culture serving an ancestral goddess. Sounds familiar? Nuada lost his arm in combat, and thus was considered unfit to oversee the magical kingdom. The reason being, if the land's champion was not whole and pure, then neither could the land be whole and pure. To amend this, Nuada sought the god of healing, who fashioned him a silver arm, after which he took his rightful place as king. Similarly, Rauru, the Sage of Light and progenitor of Hyrule, bequeaths his own arm to Link, gradually purifying him of Ganon's malice in the process. In other words, in order to replenish his divinely heroic essence, Link must assimilate and embody the generative archetypal spirit of the past, and is thus made whole. The arm is also infused with groovy quantum technology, further emphasizing the hero's cyclical relationship with time and continuity, and updating its magic that it might better serve a modern audience. But perhaps this is also alluding directly to our own psychological and spiritual relationship with technology. We rely on it so heavily, not just physically but also psychologically, that for a lot of us, losing our technology would indeed feel similar to losing an arm. In light of that, perhaps a canny modern-day healer might suggest a form of medicine that works through and around said technology. After all, the digital age is here to stay. The earth has been cracked open, and the body of the once magical kingdom lies broken, wounded, and demystified. As without, so within. So, perhaps we must find its hero, find the legend for this land, and shine his light upon its gloom.
Throughout history, there have been various cultural vanishing points that have induced a widespread ennui, disenchanting us from the wonders and mysteries of life.
We have struggled to overcome each one, attempting holistically integrated approaches with varying degrees of success. Currently, however, inborn sources of spiritual replenishment, those of mystery, community, and nature, are systematically eroding. Thus, the collective spirit is at an all-time low. But what is the experience of spiritual replenishment? What even was that medicine once provided by wondering about the moon and stars, by feasting one's senses upon lakes and mountains, and by simple interactions with one's fellow man? Well, it's not really something that can be described. It can only really be felt. But in numerous ways, I think Tears of the Kingdom tries to show us this medicine, to feel it with us. In this world of desensitization, of materialism, and of meaninglessness, of displacement, loneliness, confusion, and anxiety, where everything is changing too rapidly, when you find yourself returning to the sky, there's a sudden, much-needed peace and stillness. Perhaps you find yourself on an island of dreams, surrounded by animals and beautiful flowers, lotus ponds, ripe crystal fruits, and golden apples. and mysterious time-worn structures. On the one hand, you are deeply curious. On the other hand, when the sun hits them a certain way, it ceases to matter who built them or why. You stop thinking about it. It's just so impenetrably mysterious. You can simply trust that it's bigger than you or I. Somehow, that mystery consoles you, that no matter where you go, someone out there knows more than you could ever hope to dream. And while it won't deny you the pleasure of wondering, some aspect of that thought is comforting. And up here you are part of something. You're connected to the framework of something pure and essential. You can enjoy your solitude so completely, without ever really feeling alone. Just wandering in trust and in beauty, surrounded by what you know intrinsically to be meaningful, even if you never quite understand why. Sometimes, as you bathe in its golden light, you stop thinking entirely, and your sense of gravity diminishes yet further, and everything is just that much slower and lighter, that much more dreamlike. If you've been here, to this sky, you have entered deeply into Hylia's imaginal realm. A gate, one of many, perhaps infinite, unto other softer realms besides, where sometimes, only if you want to, you can climb higher and higher, sailing upon vessels of pure imagination. And if you are willing, if you believe, if you allow yourself to let go of everything logical, everything real, everything, even yourself, then, only when you're ready, you can return to the ground. And somehow, in defiance of such a joyful ascension, the descent is nothing less than ecstasy. Just a few blissful seconds of nothing, but it feels like everything. And then the earth seems to welcome you like an old friend, so beautifully ordinary, so lovingly simple and real. And I think to myself, what kind of person would ever want to destroy all of that? I didn't quite understand the Yiga clan for the longest time until I thought about all those people out there who unironically agree with Thanos. The Yiga are essentially a nihilistic death cult of edgelords who are, regrettably, just too shallow and self-obsessed to experience self-transcendent feelings, such as compassion, gratitude, or humility. Nor are they quite capable of imagining a non-violent means of bringing about an agreeable future. However, and this is important, there was one exception. In Breath of the Wild, a Yiga member, Dorian, chanced upon an identity outside of bananas as a result of falling in love and having children. Dorian's love for his family was so strong that he eventually renounced his ties with the Yiga, confessed to his crimes, and dedicated himself utterly to defending their village. In a simple twist of fate, Dorian found what most of us are looking for. Something better than bananas. He found something eternal, something that truly brought him outside of himself, having the paradoxical effect of illuminating his inner and deeper self. In this case, the love of his family. But naturally, it's all doom and gloom for those incapable of beholding the sun. So it's quite fitting that the Yiga convene beneath the earth. The shallowest people in Hyrule, ironically, are occupying the depths, whilst digging deeper and deeper into that metaphorical bedrock of consciousness. I think this could perhaps be symbolic of a widespread, misguided search for meaning. Think about it. These people live in a world overflowing with beauty, bounty, and goodness. In a world like that, such fearful attempts to gain the upper hand suggest a kind of permanent emptiness. The Yiga can't ever be fulfilled. Every aspect of their being is closed to it. Even after they literally enter the Underworld, where they're met with unimaginable wonders confronting the very mysteries of existence, still their interest lies predominantly in establishing dominance. For all their hideous industry, never could they imagine that others are not like them, that others would be content just to visit such a beautiful land as Hyrule, let alone possess it. Alas, when we lack a sufficient sense of identity and inner meaning, we're drawn to those who'd propose simple solutions to complex problems, easy answers to multifaceted questions, and especially immediate, if not fleeting, glimmers of self-importance. I'd say that in today's world, our collective sense of inner meaning is also languishing within a kind of abyss, overrun likewise with ravenous critters, desperate for attention and security, fearful and despairing, and harboring secret wells of malicious, toxic gloom. In a sense, I do think the answers are down there. The cure is growing, right alongside the poison. But many of us don't know how, let alone where to look for it. Breath of the Wild suggested that, after a long, hard road of honesty and self-reflection, hopefully, enough of us will rediscover those things which truly matter. But between you and me, just don't worry about all that hard stuff. That doesn't apply to us. According to Master Koga, you and I are innately better, cleverer, and more righteous than all of those people. And Koga is never wrong. Otherwise I could be wrong. No, it's them. The problem is always something external. Maybe if I get some more bubble gems, I'll be happy. Maybe if I build a big enough car. Maybe if I just eat enough of these gloom rocks, I'll stop feeling hungry all the time.
Or perhaps we just need a few more Sundelians.
I think the question Tears of the Kingdom is really asking is, are we going to raise our collective consciousness or lower it? Truly in our hearts, are we committed to petty nihilism and death in the face of our presumed insignificance? Or are we committed to transcending our current selves and becoming greater than the sums of our parts? Do we denounce life's chaotic indifference and despair? Or do we humbly submit ourselves to its mysterious continuity? Zelda, and by Zelda I mean the girl, the goddess, and the game, is aware of the necessity of her own transformation, that she must herself become the very embodiment of continuity. In order to end the conflict once and for all, the final princess of the canonical timeline must return to Hyrule's apparent origin, thereby also becoming the first princess. She then transforms herself into the sublime, immortal light dragon, in a similar capacity to the triumvirate goddesses, enduring within the heavens seemingly throughout Hyrule's entire history, and in effect closing the loop of its timeline. This act serves as a kind of ultimate sacrifice, which gives way to a form of ultimate resurrection, as Zelda's impossible return, in effect, uplifts Hyrule into the sacred realm, by releasing the sage's light from its limited human bounds, though I'll be talking more about that shortly. The Yiga, fearing this widespread resurrection of light, which is, of course, anathema to their demon king, set about damaging Hyrule's relationship with the goddess in her absence. They are, of course, too late. The roots of light stretch long and deep, and always have. Nevertheless, on her own, the enlightening goddess is not enough to permanently defeat the Demon King. The stalemate between good and evil requires a human actor to direct and champion her light. To that end, she needs to imbue Link with the purest version of the Master Sword. And to do that, she herself must achieve total enlightenment. Only then can she regenerate the Master Sword's stolen life force, bringing the sacred implement and thus Link to their full potential. To do this, Zelda inserts the sword directly into her brow, where it has seemingly remained throughout the entirety of the franchise. In certain cultural contexts, blades can serve as symbols for truth, intellect, and reason, paring down brittle impermanence and cutting away illusions, until all that remains is indestructible reality. In her usual beautifully symbolic way, Zelda is telling us that in a world clouded in gloom, the only truly incorruptible weapon is to be found within the brow of enlightenment. A thing which, like Link and the player, is neither wholly in the world nor wholly outside of it. Zelda sheds her humanity in the process, bearing witness to the entirety of Hyrule's history, retaining no memory of her prior self, nor therefore of her prior biases, desires, insecurities, hopes, or fears. Instead, she simply observes with gentle equanimity as her kingdom cycles through its joys and sorrows, as its monarchs rise and fall, and quite possibly as the timeline frays and schisms. In the literal text, this is presented as a necessity due to the time constraints of a human lifetime. But in a more symbolic sense, which I greatly prefer, Zelda is embodying eternity. Symbolically, hear me out on this one, it's not just about the length of time spent charging the Master Sword. That take is just way too literal, way too limited. It's far too materialistic and focused yet again on quantity. I think Zelda achieves her objective because she transcends time. Or perhaps I should say, the illusions of time, one of which is linearity, another of which is separateness, and another of which is quantity. Heck, if the Zelda series ought to have taught us anything, it's that if we're always just chasing that proverbial dragon of enlightenment, we'll never truly get anywhere. Because we can't consume something that's infinite. Like the Demon King himself, we'd really just be repeating an illusory linear cycle forever. I think, however, any sage of time worth her salt would wish to remind us all that existence is concurrent, that the light of truth is here right now within the bright brow of wisdom, and indeed, the entirety of your experience and mine shines forth from that very brow. So, by that reasoning, your enlightened self is here too. And only through illusion do you experience otherwise. This, I believe, is one of numerous reasons that the Zonai's presence combines representations of the Ouroboros alongside other symbols of twin serpents, both of which imbue similar cultural meanings, each associated with healing, wisdom, regeneration, and rebirth, as well as secret knowledge and mysticism, and the mysteries of time. The original Ouroboros is an expression of infinity beyond cyclical linearity. It entails an ubiquitous interconnectivity, meaning no part of the system can ever truly exist separately from the rest of the system. The twin serpents, meanwhile, suggest an equally necessary presence of physics and metaphysics, of mystery and enlightenment, and of object and subject. And therefore, unification in of itself spells the fulfillment of destiny. The game reminds us that, embedded within that same system is another dragon of time. Because there are two things, two forces that have been there all throughout history in the games, but also within us. Ganondorf and Zelda, both periodically possessing the Time Crystal, become dragon gods, but of course with opposite intentions. First, we see Zelda's kaleidoscopic eyes, shedding tears of light which splash the earth in glowing symbols and guide the player towards truth, understanding, and wholeness. Zelda's magic eyes would see the wisdom of the ages and would invite us all to come along for the ride and just softly, compassionately observe reality as it gracefully unfolds before us. As light, she illuminates the realm. Like time, she takes a wide view, enhancing salience and, therefore, raising consciousness. Later, after a raucous battle, the Demon King takes to the skies, after transforming himself into a dragon of darkness. Ganondorf's magic eyes narrow upon the earth, perceiving only conquest, obstacles, and enemies. As he transforms, he announces his intentions to destroy the opposition and shroud the entire world in darkness, which is, of course, illusion. Blindness, cutting off the senses, cutting off awareness, lowering consciousness. This point is further established in the Demon Dragon's design in battle. As Ganondorf violently tears the unifying time crystal away from his forehead, it leaves a bright naked wound upon his brow, which then darkens with inky mist. Ganondorf has chosen to reduce awareness, to remove context, to remove continuity, even to permanently remove himself in the process. Soon after, Link must strike this wound with that same holy sword, once willingly embedded within Zelda's brow. This causes a piercing beam of light which destroys the Demon King, healing the realm once and for all. The Demon King was defeated by light, but in another sense by salience, by awareness, by consciousness, and by Zelda's devotion to these very things. Where the dark dragon of time prefers a single-minded linearity, entropy therefore, the light dragon imbues his empty, meaningless existence with everything that he lacks, that sacred element of eternity, which is forever outside of his reach, and to which he is forever blind. Because the moment it enters his awareness, he ceases to exist. I think Legend of Zelda, the Hylians, the Zonai, Miyamoto, and many more of us all want the same thing, for us all to be free within our own minds. However, to obtain this sage-like freedom, to enact great deeds, or even just to be happy and to experience life more fully, we need a clear sky of consciousness, a blank slate of imagination, and the higher its ceiling, the better. Until we're not just chasing the legend, until we realize that we are the legend. This is going to sound a bit corny, but the real Zelda lives and has always lived within the hearts of the fanbase. The games, the goddess, and Hyrule itself, possessing no magic beyond what is manifested through interaction, combining our own willingly open-hearted reception with our own enthusiastic participation. Or to put it another way, it almost seems like the developers were encouraging us, even begging us to learn how to make our own joy, and warning us perhaps to understand our relationships with fiction and myth. That we can't rely upon the Legend of Zelda, nor any other external sources to persist as magic-making factories forever. that we must challenge ourselves to cut away the illusions, challenge ourselves to retrace our steps, and ask ourselves why these things made us happy, and where that joy was really coming from. So this time it's do-it-yourself fun, with a caveat that enjoying the gameplay and getting back in touch with that sense of playful exploration is merely the first step. We're also encouraged to go further, to go deeper, to carry this experience inwardly as well as outwardly, to really take the time not just to survive the game's obstacles, but to live them, not only to discover and rediscover, but to appreciate the wonders all around us.
And they are many. Next to us, they're infinite.
Right now, our sky glitters with billions of years of history. Our art galleries overflow with spectacular images, churning continuously like a kaleidoscope of pure ecstatic inspiration. Our libraries are bursting with more stories than we could possibly understand or imagine. The ground beneath our feet is teeming with an exquisitely balanced system of millions of plants, minerals, animals, and microorganisms, many undiscovered. And every single person you'll meet is a universe of unique experiences, hopes, dreams, observations, and sorrows. If anyone out there is finding our reality uninspiring, then they've clearly forgotten not where but how to look. And more importantly, to look again, and again, and to keep looking, because there are infinite ways of looking. Zelda, at its core, was always at least partially about mystery. However, we're not meant to fix it or to solve it. We're not meant to improve it or possess it or to make it golden, but rather to make ourselves golden from the inside out. The imaginal kingdom mirrors this process because it is not truly separate from us, and Tears of the Kingdom's ending reflects this beautifully. When the Demon King vanishes, Link is shown within a void, floating miraculously above the Light Dragon, as though immersed within a dream. Physics don't apply in this scene, because this is liminal territory. This is the backstage of Link's reality, as we've seen repeatedly in many other titles. Soon after, his magical reality-altering arm, through which reach both Rauru and the player, begins to quiver with light, as if possessing a mind of its own. Its legend through the player perhaps brought fully to life. And suddenly, it turns out Zelda's transformation is not irreversible. Why? Well, we have made contact with the limitless potential of the sacred realm, the imagined origin of existence, of all life, of law, of the Triforce and all other reality-modifying devices, and all of the other beautiful little stories we've invented to explain the unexplainable, and to make the impossible possible. Now yet again that same power accepts us fully. We who are fully conscious and thereby made whole can do whatever we like here, where the dream has reached its fullest flower. Thus we are capable of conceiving a means of reviving her. Zelda brings all of this to our attention because somewhere along her timeline, somewhere infinitely concurrent, she has learned how to see. And in a way, when she asks Link to find her, she's also asking us to do the same. She wants us to follow in her footsteps, and to see as she sees, to find not only her, but the legend, by encountering its true, limitless essence within ourselves.
And in the game's last seconds, she actually tells us where that is, and always was and always will be.
I had been sleeping all this time. But when I felt something, like a warm, loving embrace, I woke up.
That's the sacred realm talking. The character is simply its messenger. She's not a girl. She's not a princess. She's not really even a goddess. She and her titular realm are an expression of the divinity within all things. That very divinity is the sacred realm, the golden land, the magic kingdom. A pall of blindness threatened to consume this imaginal world of light, but it never went anywhere, and nor could it. It was us. We were the ones who went away, since we, rather like Link, fall asleep repeatedly. We're the ones who look away. We forget. Though she did ask us once before.
Do you really remember me?
If the series, or indeed history, tells me anything, that shadow of forgetfulness may yet return. But if and when that happens, the sacred realm is and always was, floating high above us, near and yet far, waiting to be reawakened, and to be caught once again within the sails of our imagination. No matter how bad things get, this is always a choice we can make. Though the Demon King's malice would have us feeling helpless, limited, fatigued, and jaded, with a little courage and a lot of imagination, we can be like Miyamoto. We can think anything, we can dream anything, and we can build anything. Because the magic is inside of us. It's in the game developers, it's in me, and it's in you. All we have to do is remember how to see.
Thank you for watching. Have a Sandelian.